Thank you for chatting with me today, Joel, former teacher, deputy principal in New South Wales government schools. It's the start of the new year. It's the start of the new term. What are the kind of things as a leader that you would be thinking about in setting up the year?
It's a very exciting time of the year, the start of the year. It's very exciting because you're laying some very strong foundations and you actually have a gem in your pocket, which is time to do these things before general school business gets in the way. And when I mean general school business, I mean swimming carnivals and teacher reports, behaviour, setting up the gym for whatever it might be, assessment. So there are nuts and bolts at the start of the year that need to be done, and there are more abstract teaching and learning discussions and plans that need to take place as well. Nuts and bolts wise, you're working with your exec team on what do the PD days look like? Do we have tables and chairs for staff to sit at? Do we have catering for that day? All the way through to, is any capital works being completed? Is that going to be done? Do we have to rope off areas on the playground? Is the playground duty roster done? Is the timetable done? Is it printed? Do we have a copy to people put on teachers' desks? So they are some of the nuts and bolts that you're, as a leader, thinking about. You also need to set the tone, I believe, at the start of the year. The start of the year sets the tone for the rest of the year, and the exec team on how they create those 4 or 5 PD days. You want staff to walk away going, they had a plan, they executed it. I have a plan, I will execute it. You also need to be thinking about what framework pedagogically you're setting up for this year. Personally, I'm a big advocate for less is more. So I'll be thinking what's in our strategic plan, what are our initiatives pedagogically, how do we measure those initiatives, and how do we set the tone for that all year. So if it is, for example, something like we're going to be moving into a explicit teaching framework, what does that look like in classrooms? What does that look like for teachers and so on? So there are nuts and bolts, but there's also that pedagogical framework. And that's staff at the start of the year. Can they walk away from their PD days with information they can apply in their next lesson? Can they articulate what the plan and vision is of the year? Again, I'm an advocate for less is more. I think if you try to do too much in the context of your strategic plan, waters down and dilutes the efficacy of all of them. So how am I supporting those teachers? Going back to your question, a lot of professional discussions with exec team, a lot of professional discussions with teaching staff, being very, very visible at the start of the year. And you don't need to formalise that. You can have those professional discussions in corridors walking past. Hello, Mr. Milroy, how's your day going? What's happening in your classroom? So those mini meetings, I guess you could call it.
Is that also important at the start of the year that you're like a teacher would do, you're kind of doing that kind of formative assessment of the lay of the land, like you're understanding how the teachers are, where they're at, who's going to need a bit of extra support? Like, is that part of those conversations? Like, oh, okay, you'd obviously make a bit more effort or be a bit more conscious in, say, checking in with new staff versus staff who've been there a while, right? That's the kind of thing you're talking about.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
And there are teachers, every school's got their teachers they know. They're your guns. They're your future principals. They're your future deputies. They are your highly accomplished teachers. The less you intervene with them, the better. The more you it's like trying to put toothpaste back into a toothpaste jar. The more you try to fiddle with a lot of those teachers, the stickier and messier it gets. So there are your guns who you just let go and you say, you do you. But there are, of course, staff that you provide support frameworks around. Visible frameworks, tangible frameworks, PDP frameworks, etc., but also just formal frameworks and informal frameworks, I should say.
Switching slightly, how would that then relate to building relationships with families and parents and carers at the start of the year, right? Like you've talked a lot about staff setting the strategic direction, setting the frameworks and the vision for them to be part of in achieving. Obviously, you have lots of new families in the school, lots of new students. What's that look like at the start of the year, particularly from a leadership point of view, in terms of like the proactive work that happens to build connections with families and how you work with teachers to do that as well?
Families are your biggest advocate. They're your biggest allies in a school. Every success of a student, the family is one of the major contributing factors. The more families and parents that we can have in a school community in the gates, meeting teachers, meeting school leaders, the better. The challenge is twofold. Australian families are some of the hardest working families in the world. I mean, there was a report from 2022 that showed Australians work 13% longer hours compared to OECD averages. So a lot of families are working and can't come in to meet and greet. And for those families, a lot of them just, there's a trust component. They'll trust you. For a lot of those families, school is very different to home life. Whatever happens at school, that's school. Whatever happens at home, that's home. So that has challenges, I guess, when it comes to student behaviour. But without a shadow of a doubt, the more we can have families on site, the better. What that looks like is, again, going to our nuts and bolts discussion earlier, you will have a Year 7 induction with your parents on day one. Students will go off to class. You keep all those parents behind and you meet and greet your advisor. You might meet and greet head of welfare, DPs, etc. I like to have more informal events, meet the teacher afternoons with a barbecue, just to put a face to name. So you've got all those big macro top-down initiatives. I encourage all of the teachers that I had the privilege of teaching with, always ring parents. Ring parents when something good happens. Ring parents when something bad happens. Ring parents more at the start of the year, because the frame environment that you set up at the start of the year will have flow-on effects for the rest of the year. If you can get that first kind of 5 to 10 weeks done really, really well, and parents know when there's an issue, they'll get a call from Mr. Milroy, the geography teacher, he's done very well, you'll have allies at home. And sometimes when you ring home, you need an ally, and sometimes when home rings the school, they need an ally. And it's that relationship that is very, very important.
I want to touch on another aspect that I guess is crucial to what you're talking about, because you're talking about setting up the tone for the year, setting goals, setting strategy. Where does data come into all of this? Is data done and dusted the year before? Is data on the plate, especially if you're looking at, say, Year 12 results? Is that kind of front and center of the mind of a deputy or a principal at this point as they're thinking about this year ahead? And I guess it also depends, varying on the school, I would imagine as well. But yeah, just talk to me a bit about that.
Yeah, data is, just to preface that, not everything that can be measured is valuable, and not everything valuable can be measured. So any conversation around data needs to be framed around the fact that you cannot boil down a profession as complex as a teaching profession to numbers on a page. You know, we work with young minds and holistic learning. It's very hard to distill that in data. You're obviously having those conversations about the prior year very early on in the term. You're having those conversations at a senior exec level. What subject? And I'll preface that by also saying that how the media reports on results is a very different beast to how the media report on results is not always an accurate reflection of what a result actually is.
The media being misleading, right? Never.
Yeah, I don't think you can distill 13 years of schooling to whether or not you got the top mark in your biology class. I think the holistic purpose of education encompasses far more than that. So without doubt, you're looking at your results last year. You might be looking at value-added growth to NAPLAN papers. You might be looking at certain subjects that perform very, very well as an exec team. You might be looking at certain components of papers across faculties or across the whole school where certain styles of questions performed better or worse, short answer, extended response, multiple choice. Those discussions that you have as a senior exec, similar to what we're having now, just these open-ended, what about this? How can we this? How might we interrogate that? I've always wanted faculty heads to go and have that collaborative, open-ended discussion with their teams. So how you role model that in an exec meeting dictates how they go and have that conversation with their KLAs. And layering in with that, again, alluding to the nuts and bolts reference at the start of the conversation, you have some nuts and bolts results, templates, forms that staff fill out that kind of come up to the exec level. So I guess there are results that are discussed collegially as well as, for lack of a better word, in paperwork. And you're hoping that programs and scopes and sequences get adjusted to accommodate those. For example, you might say, listen, this is the third or fourth year that in ancient history we're below state in this unit. It's an optional unit. Why don't we change? Or do we need to reprogram? Or what is it about this that we're just not clicking?
Most of the changes then at that point, because we're in the year, right? So if you're thinking about major changes, is that then really anticipating the next academic year, right? You're kind of working the year ahead in effect.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. And it speaks, I guess, to the importance of formative assessment and regular assessment, that you only get that school versus state data once a year. And again, this is only kind of your year 12 performance, but you only get it once a year, at which point it's probably too late for that cohort.
You can't do anything for the next year.
Right. So it
Well, not
speaks
much.
to the importance of formative tasks without a shadow of a doubt. On other sets of data, yeah, I mean, goodness, I mean, if we were talking about wellbeing, for example, you're setting up structures and routines for your staff. You're constantly encouraging staff, please use the wellbeing system that we've got in terms of logging positive, negative. You can role model that on assemblies by handing out merit awards, but that data is all being fed live into your learning management system and constantly being supervised. Constantly. And it is remarkable what insights you can achieve with a cohort of 1,000 students moving and shaking as only 1,000 adolescents do. You can make some pretty accurate predictions because the average,
especially across such a big data set, right? I'm glad you mentioned well-being, because it was the next thing I wanted to ask you about, because we read a lot obviously in the papers about burnout and stress and all these things that are ongoing in the profession. None of it's new, right? What are the ways that you managed as a leader your own well-being, but then supported your staff as well? Like you obviously mentioned, like using whatever tools or system the school's using to track well-being. Were there other ways that you were consciously managing that?
Yeah. It's tough in schools at the moment. No ifs, buts, and maybes. 50% of people who start a teaching degree will leave that teaching degree before finishing. So only 50% of university students studying the profession will finish it. 20% who finish will leave within the first 3 years. 50% of the profession are at risk of leaving the profession within the next 5 years. Yeah, so it's very tough at the moment. And I think our teachers are the most admirable, along with nurses, childcare workers, social workers. They are the most admirable, altruistic group of people who, to their own detriment, will put everyone else before themselves. And it's a testament to our teachers that despite the overwhelming behavioural, administrative, remunerative challenges facing the profession, they are still, our teachers, proactively trying to be the best iteration of themselves. I think it's important to acknowledge the limitations too of leadership. That there's only a certain amount a leader can do. Set a culture within that school, role model.
Yeah, like you talked about before.
Role model. I'm taking a health day.
It can be so hard in teaching, right? because you have that guilt of always leaving your colleagues in the lurch, like especially if you've got a load, right? A teaching load, or as you said, like it's sports carnival, like obviously you're not going to, try to do it then, but there's always that feeling of like, oh, if I'm away, someone's got to cover my
Yeah,
3 lessons,
yeah,
or
yeah,
it can be so hard to do
yeah.
that. But like you said, as a leader, modeling that where it's possible can
Jumping
just
in the
help.
trenches.
Yeah.
Little things you might not realize that your school leadership do. Little things like you're noticing in those corridor conversations that Joel's looking real tired. Mate, I'll take period 4 class. That's all right, I'll teach them. Don't worry about a lesson. I'll teach them. We'll do brain bank. We'll do brain bank activity that day. Like it's one lesson. I might teach them a little bit on whatever. So you can jump in, take lessons for staff. A little goes a long way.
Mm.
And as you alluded to earlier, it's very hard to role model, but vulnerability is a very underutilized leadership tool. I firmly believe that strong collegiality in any school or team comes from people leaning on each other in reciprocal ways, So being vulnerable and saying, hey, I just don't have it in me tomorrow. I need to look after myself. But the broader discussion is that teachers are apples, schools are barrels, and barrels are made by barrel makers.
Mm-hmm.
And a very good apple in charge of a very good barrel is still made by a barrel maker. So there are a whole host of things that we can't control that probably need more government support, more support from the media in terms of how they frame the profession.
So we've talked a lot about it in school, but now I just want to draw on, like, what are you seeing as the trends across the landscape, media reporting? I know you've done some analysis recently on mentions of the HSC in media, changes in terms of focus on skills in exams. Like, what are the kind of things that you're working with a lot of teachers, a lot of schools every day? Like, what are the things that you're seeing and hearing and reading that are current and what you're seeing it shift?
Yeah, the pre-COVID beast is a very different beast to the COVID beast, which is a very different beast to the post-COVID beast. I think we need to call a spade a shovel and realize that things are tough and it's okay for them to be tough. They are tough not because we're not working hard enough. They're tough because there's a whole range of macroeconomic, macro cultural, macro big picture conditions that make it very challenging. Doing the same thing over and over and over again, hoping for a different result, will only yield the same result at the expense of your own blood and sweat and tears that are donated with diminishing returns. And there are some patterns that I have noticed with schools. I think during COVID, there was an overwhelming, once again, the altruism and ability for teachers to just do the most remarkable things at the drop of a hat. Teachers were making videos. They were making resources. They were going above and beyond, turning themselves inside out, bending over backwards. And they now realize that, there are different ways to do things. So some really interesting trends that I've noticed. There are more and more framing from the media is back to framing on results. That's one thing I have noticed. I think that period of time in COVID where media was not necessarily reporting on results on as much as they were, I think that has now swung back the other way. There is more and more students worried about academic performance that might not have been there in COVID. I don't know. I don't know if that's those students that did have those big gaps and those big gaps are now being actualized and now they think, oh goodness, I've got to work hard to catch. I don't know if that could be it. And there is a lot of data to support that. And the challenge is, in particular for young people who are different learners, how do we cater for those different learners in a different learning environment? They're behaviorally, they're different learners, how they access information, but they're still going through the same institution of exams that what was pre-COVID. So you kind of got to fit a round peg into a square hole, and that's a very tough thing for teachers. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's wrap up with the question of, like, what would be your leadership hack or your leadership tip?
being visible is very important. Role modeling is very important. But understanding that you don't always need to be right.
Mm.
It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to ask dumb questions. It's okay to ask dumb questions even though you know the answer to the dumb question you're asking. It's okay to let people explain things to you even though you know what they're explaining. Some other really great
Vulnerability.
tips. Sorry, you go.
Back to vulnerability.
Yeah, back to vulnerability. Going other great tips. Kill it with kindness is another great tip. And just the understanding that you don't need to, get in the trenches as much as possible. Like, don't be perceived to be the leader that hasn't taught in a while. Like, go to the staff room, have a cup of coffee, and say, hey, like, I just had a shocking lesson with year 9 maths. Wow, that was honking. Own it. Be in the trenches, and don't try to be the expert at every instrument. Just understand how the band plays. And, if you create a culture, as is your sole purpose in life, as a leader, is to create a culture in which, professional practice flourishes. You can surround yourself with really, really good operators who will resonate off each other. And once they start to resonate, they get this harmony, this hum, this equilibrium. Don't touch it. Just let it go. Let it go and give them the credit. You just watch this beautiful thing flower, so I don't know if they're tips or hacks.
Just
I had a
advice
wonderful...
according to Joel.
Hey?
Advice according to Joel.
Yeah, I had a wonderful KLA. I just look back at my Hizzy KLA and they're the best teachers I've ever seen. And I was the worst teacher. And I just thought, my constant thoughts were, how are my team happy? Are they resonating? But they were just the best teachers. And they didn't really need much from me. They wanted support, behaviour, wanted me to take a couple of lessons if they were busy, surrounding yourself with good operators and a good operator is someone who isn't just a good operator in your definition. A good operator is someone who's a good operator in a whole host of definitions. Sometimes your good operators tell you you're wrong. Sometimes your good operators disagree with you. And that is so important because it's easy to surround yourself with people who agree with you, but that doesn't mean you're moving in the right direction. So a nice symphony needs a saxophone, a clarinet, it needs an oboe, it needs a whole host of instruments that do different things in a different way and sound really different. And sometimes it's different to what you do, but that's okay.
Right. That's a good message.